you have seen it. The rich hold cash, piles of it, and then those same people turn around and tell you to invest everything. It feels like a setup, like they know something they are not saying. Like the real move is cash, and the advice to buy stocks is what they feed the rest of us. Let me give you the number that started this whole idea. Right now, Berkshire Hathaway is sitting on a record $30.97 billion in cash and short-term treasuries. That is the most the company has ever held. It is more than a third of the entire company's value. Warren Buffett built that pile. And Buffett has spent decades telling ordinary people to do the opposite. Buy an index fund and hold it. Never sell. So which is it? Cash or stocks? Do as they say or do as they do. Here's the part that is going to surprise you. Your gut is right about the first half. The rich really do hold a lot of cash. A recent Capgemini Wealth report looked at millionaires around the world. Just a year ago, cash was their single biggest holding, a record 26% of everything. A big market rally has since pulled some of it back into stocks. Even now, it is still about a quarter, not 5%, a full quarter. So this is not a myth. Wealthy people sit on cash, and they sit on a lot of it. But the conclusion almost everyone draws from that fact is wrong. And that wrong conclusion is quietly costing regular people a fortune. By the end of this video, you will see something strange. The same exact move holding cash builds wealth for one person and freezes it for another. Same action, opposite result. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance. The kind that actually works for normal people, not the kind that gets you to click a thumbnail. No motivational fluff or fantasy returns. We just discuss what the math actually does over time. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. First, let me say why this idea grips people so hard. Cash feels good. When your money sits in a savings account, the number never drops. You open the app and it is right there. Safe, solid, yours. Stocks do the opposite. They wiggle. They fall for no reason and scare you. So cash feels like the grown-up choice, and stocks feel like the gamble. That feeling is exactly backwards over a long enough stretch of time. Today, I want to show you why. Let me start with the thing nobody explains. Cash is not one thing. It has two completely different jobs. And which job it does depends entirely on who is holding it. Let me tell you about my neighbor Frank. Frank spent 30 years running a heating and cooling company. Last year he sold it. After taxes, he walked away with about $3 million. Frank keeps a big chunk of that in cash. Around $750,000 just sitting there. Now, you might look at Frank and think, see, the rich guy hoards cash. But watch what that cash is actually doing. Frank is waiting. There is a commercial building near him that he wants. The owner wants to retire and will sell one day, probably below market. When that day comes, Frank writes a check. No loan and no scramble. His cash is loaded. It is aimed at something specific. It is a weapon, and he knows exactly what he is going to shoot. That is what the rich mean by cash. It is ammunition. Think of it like a fire extinguisher versus a security blanket. A fire extinguisher hangs on the wall doing nothing, but the second there is a fire, it earns its whole existence in 10 seconds. A security blanket also does nothing. The difference is it never has a job. It just makes you feel better. Frank's cash is a fire extinguisher. It is idle, but it is ready, and it is pointed at a real fire he can see coming. Berkshire is the same story, just with more zeros. That $39.7 billion is not scared money, it is hunting money. And this year it hunted. Berkshire agreed to buy a home builder called Taylor Morrison for about $6.8 billion. They paid a fat premium and did it in one move, because the cash was sitting ready. That is the whole point of the pile. When the right thing shows up, you buy it whole, right now, while everyone else is lining up financing. Here's the pattern. When stocks get cheap, that pile shrinks because they are out buying. When prices get silly, the pile grows because nothing is worth owning. The cash is a coiled spring. It waits to be released the moment prices make sense, so the cash always has a target. That is job number one. Now let me tell you about my buddy Marcus. Marcus is 48. He has about $70,000 saved up, which took him years. Marcus watches the same videos you do. He hears that the rich hold cash and wait for the right moment, so he decides to be smart like them. He keeps $45,000 in a savings account as his war chest. The plan is to swoop in and buy when everyone panics. Only 25,000 of his money is actually invested. Here is the problem. Marcus does not have a Taylor Morrison. There is no building he is stalking. He has no deal and no target for that 45,000. He just has a feeling that cash means safety and readiness. His cash is not a fire extinguisher. It is the security blanket. It feels warm and responsible, and it does absolutely nothing. And here is the cruel twist. The crash Marcus is waiting for will come. It always does eventually, but when it comes, it never looks like an opportunity. It looks like the end of the world. The news is scary. His coworkers are losing money. Everybody around him is selling. In that moment, the last thing Marcus will do is dump his savings into stocks. He will freeze the way most people freeze. So the war chest he built for the big moment usually never gets fired at the big moment. It sits through the whole thing and comes out the other side. Still cash, still doing nothing. That is the difference nobody tells you. Frank's cash is pointed at something. Marcus's cash is pointed at nothing. Same object, sitting in the same kind of account. One is a tool. The other is just a pile of money slowly going nowhere. And here's where it gets expensive. Let me show you what Marcus's blanket actually costs him. Marcus is 48 and wants to retire around 63. That is 15 years. Take his 25,000 that is invested. At a 7% real return, which is a fair long-term average after inflation, that grows to about $69,000. Now add his 45,000 in cash. Cash roughly keeps up with inflation and no more, so call it still worth 45,000 in today's money. Marcus ends up with about $114,000. Now run the other version. Marcus stops playing war chest and just invests all 70,000. Same 15 years, same 7%. He ends up with about $193,000. Same person, same market. The only thing that changed was whether the money was working. The difference is $79,000. That is the price of the blanket. Marcus paid $79,000 to feel ready for a crash he was never actually going to buy. Let me make that even more concrete. Every single year that 45,000 sits idle, it quietly gives up around $3,000 of growth it could have had. That is a car repair. That is a weekend away. Every year, gone in exchange for a feeling. And the feeling is not even true, because he probably never spends the war chest anyway. So, why does the same move work for Frank and fail for Marcus? This is the part I really want you to sit with. It comes down to which chapter of the story you are in. Frank is holding cash on top of a finished fortune. His $3 million is already built. Look at just the invested part, the $2.25 million that is not in cash. At a safe 4%, that alone throws off about $90,000 a year to live on. Frank had set his entire cash pile on fire tomorrow and still never work again. The cash is not his wealth, it is the extra. It is overflow from a bucket that is already full. Marcus is the opposite. Marcus is still filling the bucket. His cash is not sitting on top of a fortune. It is standing in the exact spot where the fortune is supposed to go. When Frank holds cash, he protects a game he already won. When Marcus holds cash, he delays a game he has not started. Picture a marathon. Frank already crossed the finish line. He is stretching, sipping water, taking it easy. You are at mile 2. If you copy the guy stretching at the finish, you stop running. His rest is earned. Yours would just be quitting early. That is the trap. You are watching people in the last chapter of the story and copying their moves in your first chapter. Frank's quarter in cash is a rounding error on a life that is already set. Your quarter or your half is the engine you never turned on. The rich are not lying to you when they say invest. They are telling you what to do in the chapter you are actually in. They just happen to be doing something different, because they are somewhere different. Okay, so that is the first big idea. Cash is ammunition for them and a blanket for you, and you are copying the wrong chapter. But there is a second layer here, and honestly, it is my favorite part because it flips the whole thing on its head. You have been envying the wrong thing. Go back to Buffett and that $39.7 billion in cash. Everybody looks at that pile and thinks it is a signal. Like Buffett knows a crash is coming and is hiding in cash, so you should too. But that is not why the pile exists. The pile exists because Buffett is too big to do what you can do. Think about it. If you have $500, you can buy an index fund this afternoon. The whole American stock market in one click. Buffett cannot. If Berkshire tried to quietly pour 397 billion into the market, it would move prices against itself. He is a whale in a swimming pool. He cannot move without making waves. So he waits for rare, giant deals that are big enough to matter for a company his size. The cash is not his strategy. It is his cage. Let me spell out your advantages because you probably do not know you have them. You can buy the entire market in one click this afternoon with no paperwork. Buffett cannot. When he buys a big piece of a company, he has to file public reports and sometimes take a board seat. You just press a button. You can own a tiny slice of all 500 big American companies with a few dollars. He has to swallow whole businesses because nothing smaller moves his needle. You stay small and quick. That is your edge. And he traded his away by getting rich. And Buffett has said this himself for years. He has said that being small is a huge structural advantage. Managing a small amount of money, he could earn returns far beyond what he can get today. Not because he lost his touch, because size is an anchor. At the start of this year, he even handed the CEO job to a man named Greg Abel. The cash pile just kept growing. The problem is the size, not the person. Sit with that. The most successful investor alive says he would rather have your problem than his. He would trade places with the person who has $10,000 because that person can do things he cannot. You have the one advantage he would love back. You are small enough to just own the whole market and let it compound. No waiting, no hunting for elephants, no cage. So when the rich tell you to buy an index fund and hold it, they are not hiding the good stuff. They are handing you the thing they lost. The advice is not a trick. It is the closest thing to a gift you will get in personal finance. Now let me be straight with you, because this channel does not do fairy tales. That 7% I used is not a promise. It is a long-run average, and the road is bumpy. The market falls. Some years it falls hard. It can drop 20, 30, even 40% and sit there for a while. That is real, and it is going to happen to you more than once. And here's a fair question. If crashes are real, isn't the rich person's cash actually smart? Aren't they protected when it all drops? Partly yes. Part of why the wealthy hold cash is so they are never forced to sell in a downturn. If Frank needs money during a crash, he spends his cash and leaves his investments alone to recover. That is genuinely wise. But here's the thing. You get that same protection with a small, simple layer of cash, not a giant war chest, just an emergency fund, a few months of expenses and a savings account. That way a job loss or a busted transmission never forces you to sell stocks at the bottom. That covers you. Everything past that emergency fund does not need to be waiting, it needs to be working. The difference is scale. They hold years of spending in cash because they have a fortune worth defending. You hold months of spending in cash because you have a paycheck to protect. Same instinct, size to the life. Copying their percentage is like a rookie copying a champion's diet. The champion earned the right to eat that way. You have not run the race yet. I want to name the real reason this is hard. It is not the math. The math is simple. The hard part is that cash feels like control, and investing feels like letting go. When you hold cash, you feel like you are holding the wheel. When you invest and walk away, it feels like taking your hands off it, but that feeling lies to you. The person gripping the wheel of a parked car is not driving. He just feels like he is. The real progress happens while the money is out there working, in the years you are not touching it. So let me bring it all the way home. What should your cash actually be for? 2 things, and that is it. 1. An emergency fund, so life's accidents do not wreck you. 2. Money you know you need soon, within the next couple of years, like a down payment or a surgery you have scheduled. That money belongs in cash because you cannot risk it. Here is a simple test you can run tonight. Look at the cash in your savings account. Ask one question about it. What, specifically, is this money waiting to do and when? If you have a real answer, keep it. A roof next spring, a car in 18 months, a few months of rent for safety, those all count. If your only answer is just in case, or when the time feels right, that is not a job. That is a blanket. And that money wants to be working for you. Every dollar past those 2 jobs is not a war chest. It is a worker you sent home. It is potential you taught yourself out of, because a pile of cash feels like control. The rich taught you to hold cash, but they never told you the second half of the sentence. They hold cash because they already won and because their cash has a target. Yours usually has neither. So for you, in your chapter, the boring answer is the right one. Build the emergency fund, then invest the rest. Let it sit and let time do the thing that made all those wealthy people wealthy in the first place. You do not need their cash pile. You need the years of compounding that they already used up. That is the real edge. And you are the one who still has it. If this changed how you think about the money in your savings account, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me how much cash you are holding that has no job, no target, no near-term need, just sitting there. Be honest, even if the number stings. I read every comment and I reply to as many as I can. And if you want the next video, hit subscribe. In it, I walk through exactly how big your emergency fund should be at your age and income, and where every dollar past that goes. That one is going to save some of you from a very expensive habit. I'll see you in the next one.